Welcome to the Delta Podcast. I'm your host, Coach Coale. This is the show where we dive into the relationship between leadership and change, what it means for individuals, teams, and organizations looking to thrive. Today's a great day to be coachable, so let's jump in. Hello, Sarah, my friend. It is great to see you.
Hi, Kevin. It's so good to see you as well.
Yeah, welcome in. Thank you for taking the time to come here on the Delta. I'd love to read a little bit about you to let folks know just the top line of your story, if that's okay, as we get started.
Sure. Sounds great.
Okay. So my guest today, Sarah Musich, is a licensed clinical social worker. A Los Angeles native, she received a Bachelor of Science in Psychology and Sociology at Tulane University and her Master's in Social Work from California State University in Los Angeles. Sarah spent the first part of her career working at an adoption agency, providing counseling services to adoptive families and birth parents. She now works as a school counselor and runs a private practice where she provides therapy to adolescents and adults. And I want to add, on a personal note, somebody that I had to call a friend and former colleague. You and I had a chance to work together a number of years ago for a handful of years.
We did. I'm actually coming live to you from my office where we spent many, many hours together. So
I remember that auspicious space. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yes. I felt very honored to get to talk to you and that we had that time together. So this is really special. So thank you again for inviting me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I don't know what you're bringing in to talk about. You know, on the Delta, we talk about the backdrop here is leadership and change, what it means for individuals, teams, and organizations. I have some questions that have come to mind as I've anticipated this conversation, but we use 3 questions to launch every time. And the first question is, what do you want to talk about? So the floor is yours. What would you like to talk about with the time that we got?
Amazing. Well, I guess the thing that's really been on my mind recently, and I think because it's something that affects me both personally in my own kind of journey with myself, and also just comes up so much, whether it be at school or with my clients, is just, you know, this idea of self-kindness. And my favorite way to talk about it with someone is talking about, you know, talking to yourself or treating yourself as if you treat your good friend. So, and I think, you know, we live in a world in which people tend to be super hard on themselves. And I think it's, you know, it's just something that is constantly, I feel, comes up in so many places. And I'm constantly asking myself, like, why is it so difficult for people to kind of embrace this idea of self-kindness, and how do we make it just commonplace that we would treat ourselves the way we would treat our friends. So I think that's kind of a thing that's really been on my mind a lot recently.
So let me make sure I got this. So self-kindness, in other words, like treating yourself the way you might treat a friend. And I'm sensing there is typically a difference there. What you run into, what you see is people are treating themselves differently than they might somebody else. 100%.
Absolutely. Yes.
So say a little bit more about that. I'm curious about the space between those two things. If self-kindness is something that we're working on, you're supporting me with, what are you noticing in terms of how I'm treating myself, I guess on average or typically, versus how I might be treating other people?
Sure. Well, let's say, you're, you know, doing your coaching and you have like a session that you just don't feel goes great, right? It just doesn't go how you'd hoped it had gone. You went in there with all these grand plans and then you come out, and I'm sure this never happens to you, of course.
Yeah, I know what that feels like.
You know, you're like, oh my gosh, that was awful. And I think as a human, like our tendency is to just be like, oh, I can't believe that happened. And we kind of ruminate. And we're thinking about all the ways in which it went wrong and feeling like, I don't know about you, but I have like that, why am I even, you know, what am I doing here? Like I start to question all these things, right? And we just beat ourselves up and we get in this cycle and we're just feeling terrible about it, right? And maybe we'll talk to someone about it. But I often turn to people and I say, okay, and people will tell me this like in their life, like, right, this thing happened, I can't believe it. Or like, you know, a kid gets a bad grade on a test. Oh my God. And I say, okay, well, what if your best friend came to you and told you that happened, right? If your best friend called you right now and said, I just had this terrible session with a client, it went so bad.
Yeah.
what would you say to them? Would you tell them, oh yeah, you suck, like that's awful, I can't believe you did that? And people are just like, well, no. I would say, hey, you had a bad day, like,
Yeah.
that happens, like, or
Yeah.
you're like, don't worry about it, or oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that happened to you, right? I think that our inclination with people we love, we would never say the things to them that we say to themselves. And so it's just so wild to me that it's such a foreign concept to people, right? That it's so easy for most of us to give kindness to all the other people in our life, sometimes even strangers, right? A lot of people can have a lot of empathy and compassion, but when it comes to how we talk to ourselves, we often are really, really hard on ourselves.
That's a great clarification. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So, okay, self-kindness is what we're going to talk about with the time that we got. Why, of all the things that you and I could jam about, why should we talk about this now, at this
Right now.
particular moment in the world?
I guess, part of it just feels like, to me, I mean, I think it's always urgent to me to talk about this because I do think it's so beneficial to people to know this. And once you can start to do this, there's so many health benefits for you and like your mental health and wellness and just how you kind of get to approach the world. It can change your perspective. It's really helpful. It's actually always my, seems to almost be almost every year my theme for the students here. We have a theme every year and I almost have the same theme every year because I think we need to keep learning it. And I also feel like, I guess right now at this point in time, right, there's a lot of really awful things happening in the world and a lot of negativity, and it's easy to get sucked up into swirls of, things being really hard, right, for us, and being impacted by the things around us, whether it be personally or just looking at the world in general and things that are happening in our country and beyond our country. So I think having the space to at least be able to offer ourselves some grace and kindness in moments when things are hard, I think is super important right now. And for us to be able to like continue to move forward and continue to do the things we need to do.
I like how you put that, Sarah. So this is a moment in time where it's not hard to see unkindness, upset. There's a lot of difficulty around. So there's the moment that we're in, and it sounds like this is an evergreen theme. Like I'm picturing you like, what's the theme going to be again this year? Like, is it going to be something new? And then this sort of flops
every
back
time. Every time. Yeah.
Self-kindness again. That was great.
Yeah.
Great. So I'm following you in terms of the topic and why this moment. Tell me about success. The third question here. If this is a wonderful conversation from your perspective, what are we aiming for?
I guess that's a tough one, but my aim, I guess, would just be to have kind of a better understanding, right, of what self-kindness can look like, right, and how we can embrace it, and maybe like figuring out like how do you help people come into touch with that self-kindness and be able to access it more freely and not feel like, I think it's similar to like this idea of, self-care, like doing things for ourselves is often seen as being selfish, or like we're not supposed to do things for ourselves. We're supposed to be worrying about other people all the time, right? And I think that this is something that my hope would be that people could see, or that we could figure out like that this is important and, crucial, and that, it would feel accessible, I guess, to everybody.
And not like an indulgence, not a like,
exactly.
But by focusing on myself in this way, I'm not being selfish. I'm essentially treating myself as I might anybody else. You made a great point earlier, like not just my friends, but people maybe I don't even know.
Yes, absolutely. Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's the point I hadn't considered. So, okay. All right, my friend, where do you want to start? I'm going to kick it back to you. Where should we begin?
Oh my gosh, that's such a great question. Well, I guess maybe talking about, why it is that people tend to be so hard on themselves. Like where does that come from? I don't know that I have an answer to that, but it's definitely something that I think about often. Like even sometimes, as a parent or a person working with other people, and you're trying to not only help people or raise children or whatever, but I think you're trying to model the things that you think are important, right? So even within myself, like those moments where I'll say something really terrible to myself and I'm just like, what? Like, where did that even come from? Why am I doing this? Like, why would you say that?
Yeah. So tell me more about where you think, like, what's the root of this?
Mm-hmm.
If
Mm-hmm.
this um, is such a bad thing for
Mm-hmm.
us, and something that, it's, if it continues to be a theme year after year, where do you think, what's the root system for this?
Yeah.
Where's
Yeah.
it coming from?
Well, I think some of it kind of connects to this, idea of it's just feeling very selfish to treat ourselves right. And I think that we, especially culturally, I feel at least living here in America, that like there's very much this, you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You've got to like, work hard. I think that I noticed it with like young people working in, a school with kids who are high achieving and come from successful families. Like there's this idea of you have to just keep moving forward. You have to do the best.
Mm,
You have to be the best. And I think to me, that lends itself to like feeling like you need to keep pushing yourself. And
yeah,
I find that many people like pushing yourself looks like, you know, going, like rest, don't rest is not
not an option.
exactly. You just got, you should,
Yeah.
that's not, that there's no, you got to perform. You've got to do it. You've got to keep going. And I think that our society sometimes like embraces that culture, right? This idea of like, when people talk about how stressed they are, how much they have to do, how little sleep they got, like that's kind of what
That's the big
is
one. Yeah.
celebrated and like
Yes.
done. Oh my gosh, I only got 3 hours of sleep last night. And then that's like something to brag about. And it's like, that's terrible, right?
Yeah.
Like it shouldn't be something we're excited about. So I feel as though that is the messages that we
Yeah.
get, whether it be from family members, whether it be from like media, like it's coming at us
Yeah.
all over the place. And so sure, like it doesn't feel like like that feels like that's what I'm supposed to be doing. Like I'm
Yes.
supposed to just keep going. And it's not, it's supposed to be hard. And, I'm working forever towards this goal that I don't even know what that is versus being able to stop and enjoy and give myself a break. Right.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so.
Oh my gosh, a break. Well, you're making a good point, and I'm hearing it like, okay, so we've got this drive to be successful,
Mhm.
and at a certain point, I imagine that's a good thing because that's a motivator, and we want to do well,
Yes.
and
Yep.
and like a lot of things, if it's not, if it's left unchecked, or it's not a thing that we are cultivating intentionally, then it in excess can become a bad thing
Sure.
and can backfire.
Hmm.
And so I'm just imagining, a scenario where you and I are connecting, and I'm like, oh, hey, how are you?
Yeah.
Oh, I've been, super busy,
Yep.
it's just a lot going on. And we're so competitive. I have to prove I'm busier than you. And I'm like, well, you're busy. I've got a lot going on.
Exactly.
And that's the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that can be predominant. That can be the
100%.
default culture where it's like, well, you're busy, I'm busier. Or,
Yes.
you're, if it's, I think especially in competitive environments, well, I would imagine
Yeah.
it can be even easier to slip into a space where self-compassion, self-kindness is harder to achieve.
100%. It seems to be that way to me.
Yeah.
Like for sure. For sure.
I think in my work supporting founders and teams,
Hmm.
one thing that's on my mind is I get to hear the things that they're wrestling with and the stuff that's keeping them up at night, or the lack of sleep that they're getting trying to pursue things like product market fit. And, maybe they have investors that are saying, hey, what's the latest? And they want to show some results. So there's
Yep.
a lot of pressure there.
100%.
So, and I guess the question that's coming up for me is, I can imagine the founder out there saying, yeah, I would love self-kindness, but it's not an option. I've got to meet numbers, or I've got people on my team that are depending on me.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to somebody that feels like they're kind of locked in, and self-kindness, it sounds good,
Yeah.
but it doesn't feel like an option at the moment?
Yeah. I guess I feel like I would tell them, like, you cannot help or do the things that you need to do for other people until you're able to do them for yourself.
Mm.
You have to be able to give yourself the same grace and care and like if you have a boss or someone who wants these things from you, that's wonderful. And of course you want to do that for them, but you also have to be able to give those things back to yourself, and whether that means like just being easy on yourself when the prototype doesn't go right, or you have a meeting that doesn't go well, or whether it means like, self-kindness in the vein of like self-care and being like, I need to shut my phone off for the night. Like I need to give myself this time right now. Like it's okay that I need to stop right now. That's okay. And I can do that.
So in your work, I want to take this point a bit further. Mm-hmm. When people do that, what happens?
When they actually take the break?
Yeah, when they take the break, shut the phone off.
Incredible. Yeah, it's incredible. I've been thinking, as we've been having this conversation, I've been thinking about a client I had, and she was for all means and purposes retired, okay. And she just was like going all the time, and she's like, I have this beautiful house and I can't even like sit in my backyard and enjoy it. And I was like, well, okay, why not? Like what? And she was like, I guess I just feel like that I'm being lazy, or that's wrong. And I was like, this is your time. Like why couldn't you do that for yourself? And I said like the same thing. What would you tell like your daughter if she called you and told you? Well, I would tell her, of course, take a break. And then I remember meeting with her. She's like, you're not going to believe it. She's like, I sat in my backyard all afternoon and read a book. And she's like, it changed everything. Like she started just leaning in and doing the things that she really wanted to do and that were really important to her. And she's like, I can't believe I didn't do this before. Like, I can't believe that I was just denying myself like this rest and this time and this ability to just be like, it's okay if I need to do this. Like I can't take care of everyone else all the time. Like I have to give it back to myself too.
Wow. It was just you asking that question.
Yeah. And just having that. She's like, yeah. And it was like, and then we didn't even meet that long. She's like, I think we met she's like, I think I'm good now. She's like, I think I'm okay. I'm like, yeah, that's wonderful. So I think that, it can be really profound, and it can really and even like, I think in moments of stress and like those moments when things feel really hard and we start to get into these like spins or cycles or feeling awful about things, even if it's something out of our control, just acknowledging to ourselves, like, yeah, this is really hard. I'm feeling pretty bad about this thing right now. And, instead of expecting ourselves to just push through and keep going and, I got to be okay, got to keep it all together all the time. That moment of just being like, yeah, that's tough, really allows ourselves to kind of like move through those hard emotions too, and allows ourselves just to kind of be kind to ourselves. Because again, right, if our friend came to us and was like having a really hard time with something, we wouldn't tell them, okay, suck it up and get back to work. Like, what are you complaining about? Right? We would listen to them and we would say to them, gosh, that sounds really awful. I'm so sorry that's happening for you. So
I don't know if you see this in your work. I see it in my coaching where a founder might hop on and like, I can see in the body language, they're carrying a lot. And they'll say like, can I vent for, a few minutes? And then it's like 15 minutes later, they're still sort of unpacking the thing that they wanted to share. And then when they get it, they feel like, okay, it's on the table. A lot of times I'll hear they'll apologize. They're like, I'm so sorry, I needed to vent. And I think about venting as like I'm sharing willy-nilly without a purpose. But what we're talking about is like a really purposeful process where I'm acknowledging, as you said, that this is really hard. And I'm opening up, I'm being vulnerable. In the way that if I step outside of myself, I'd want a friend to be if they were in that situation. And then what almost always happens is when they get it out, you can see the body language shift back.
Yes. Yeah.
And they feel relief. And I'll say, well, how do you feel now? And they're like, I feel a lot better now that I talked through it.
Yes, exactly. Absolutely. When we hold these things in our heads, it seems it's so much bigger, it's so much heavier. And part of it might be the fact that probably the conversations we're having are either not moving through it, right? Just kind of the spin cycles happening, thinking about what happened, and we don't have someone there to validate and be like, oh. And sometimes that's something we can give to ourselves, and absolutely like something to give someone else. And it is so interesting how many times people feel that way, or how many times people feel like, well, I really shouldn't feel that bad about this because there's so many bigger things happening in the world, right? We minimize the things that are impacting us because we feel like, well, this is in the grand scheme, this is not a big deal. But the reality is like if something is happening to you and it's impacting to you, it is a big deal for you. And it still deserves like that vent or that space. It's just, you are worthy of it, and your problem's worthy of being heard as much as anything else. And I think sometimes people feel like they don't deserve that space because it's not big enough or it's not hard enough.
Back to that competitive thing. Like,
Sure.
I deserve to feel this way if only my struggle or problem were like a little bit more significant.
Exactly. Like I'm suffering, but I really can't go talk to like a coach or a therapist or something because it's just not, I mean, come on, I have all these other great things in my life. Like, how can I be upset about this? Right. Like, no, I shouldn't, I can't, I shouldn't need that, and it's a shame. It's a shame that people feel that way because, we are all deserving of support. We are all deserving of support, whether it come from someone else or from ourselves. Like that's something that we all need.
I love the way that you put that. We're all deserving of support. That's beautiful. I would like to share. So one of the greatest leadership lessons I've ever gotten came from you. You and I were having a conversation, I think probably in that space that you're in.
Probably, yeah.
Honestly, forget what we were talking about. The thing I remember though from that conversation, Sarah, is a question you asked me. And you said, when I was probably venting and sharing, and you said, what is going to matter about this in 20 years? And I have used that question since that moment. That is the thing I put in my pocket and I have carried with me ever since. And I think there's a collection of founders out there that are probably using some version of that question for themselves and with their teams at the moment. Such a profound question. Will this matter in 20 years? I have found, I want to get your take on it, but I think the brilliance of that question for me is very few things that I stress about. 100%. When I ask myself that question, can I say, yes, in fact, this will matter?
Absolutely.
And when it does, when I'm like, no, this actually does matter. We need to go see those people because 20 years from now, who knows?
Yes.
It makes it much clearer in terms of, if this is really a value that's a non-negotiable for me, what is the behavior that I need to take? What's the thing I need to do? But that question for me is like, you talk about evergreen stuff. It is worth its weight in gold. Like, what about this will matter in 20 years?
Absolutely.
So tell me about that question. Where did it come from? And how do you think about that question now?
Yeah, I appreciate that so much. I love that. I've thought about this question often. I think for me, it's all about perspective. And I think some of it comes from work I do, right? Where I think that we, again, get these tunnel vision glasses on and we're worrying about something. And not only do things maybe not matter, but also like, there's some percentage of the things we worry about actually come true, right? Our brains are just constantly going, we're constantly worrying. And it's like, you have to kind of step back and look at things a little bigger. And I think for me, really the origin of this question might be a little more personal. In that, especially, I'm a very sensitive person. I always have been, but especially as a young child, I think things just really impacted me, and I would just get real upset. And I think my mom did a real good job of talking to me about perspective and like helping me, like, this is just a test, or this is just a this. Like, look broader. So I think as I got older, it was something that really helped me personally, right, to be able to step back and think to myself, like, is this thing really that important? Yeah. And like you said, like if it is, then okay, that means I know what to do, right? Like I have to do this thing because it is going to matter. I have to work through this, or I have to mend this, or take care of this. And if it's not, then maybe I get to just release myself of worrying about it, right? I think we spend a lot of time just worrying about, what other people are thinking about us, what's going to happen, the impact of what we're doing. And oftentimes we're using a lot of energy for things that probably aren't really impacting anyone but us. And people aren't really probably thinking about these things the way that we are. And so when we get a chance to kind of step back and look at it like, okay, well, how big of a deal is this? Actually, maybe I'm making it a bigger deal than it has to be, and I can give myself some space and I can just let this go. It can can change things,
Yes. I appreciate you sharing that. I imagine that a lot of folks listening appreciating that that vulnerability.
Of course, yeah.
That this is the thing that you have. I've been carrying it with me for a while. As the question sounds like that you've been carrying around a bit longer.
Yeah.
There's a coach, Matt Mashari, talks about fear and anger giving bad advice. That they get in there and they tell you to do something, and oftentimes if you're in a state of fear or anger, it's 100%. Bad advice. It's going to tell you to do, in many cases, the opposite of what you ought to do. But this conversation is making me edit that in real time, and I'm adding worry to that now.
Oh yeah.
I'm adding worry to that worry gives bad advice.
100%.
And if I can create a little bit of space for me to think about this thing more objectively, then I can navigate that moment that I'm in more successfully. I mean, if you asked me what was I doing 20 years ago, I'd really have to get the calculator out.
Yes, exactly. How old was I? Where was I living? What was? Yes.
But I'm sure in that moment I was probably stressed as hell about something else.
100%.
100%. So I think this is an important point, and for me that's been a wonderful tool to. I hadn't thought about self-kindness in the way that we're talking about it in this conversation, but just as a really helpful reset thing. I talk about now in my relationship with my partner. I use with clients, what about this is going to matter in 20 years? And 9 times out of 10,
it's not. Yeah.
It's not. In those moments where it does, we're like,
we got to figure this out. Absolutely.
Makes it much easier.
Absolutely.
Can I ask you about therapy and coaching?
Sure. I'd love to talk about that.
Okay. So I think you know this. I'm very pro therapy. I've had some wonderful therapists in my life. A topic that comes up in coaching is when should you recommend, from the coach's perspective, therapy to a client versus continuing on with a coaching engagement. And this is a question I get sometimes from my clients, which they'll say, or I might identify, so, what you just mentioned, I think really is sort of best in that zone for you to talk about with a therapist. They're going to be in a better position to provide the support that you need. And yet I think this is still it can be a meaningful gray area.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking too.
So I have my take on this. I'd love to get your thoughts on, and I don't know if it's helpful for me to share my sort of perspective, and then
I'd love to hear yours.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd love to.
So, well, one thing is I'm not trained in the way that you are. So if somebody, I think this is important, if somebody says, well, if they're talking about anxiety, or they're talking about feeling depressed, or they're exhibiting signs that feel like, okay, they're potentially in that zone, or something else, at that level, I don't have the training to support the client in the way that they deserve to be supported. And so I might say to them, hey, what you just mentioned feels like it's more in the realm of therapy. Do you have a therapist? Have you ever seen a therapist? And in some cases, I might even recommend a therapist if that's a resource that would be helpful for them. And I think therapists, in my experience, are excellent at going into the past to help us make sense of the present so we can move forward. As a coach, I will rarely go into the past. One, because I'm not trained in the way that I just described. But also, for me, coaching is much more about where are you now and where do you want to get to, and how can we close the gap between those two things. So it's more about setting goals, achieving those goals, and when those goals are, they're elusive, figuring out what is in the way there. The gray area comes in when maybe I'll ask about limiting beliefs or something that's coming up for the client that may be jamming them up. That's how I think about it generally. That therapists are remarkable about going to the past to make sense of the present, in supporting you in this moment with stuff that you may be working through to move forward. Coaching, I'm not going to support in that clinical way. And it's more about goals. It's more about where are you now and where do you want to get to? So that's my quick summary, but
yeah. I
I've
think
never talked about this with a therapist.
I love it. I love it. I agree with that a lot, right? Like I think too, what's hard, not only is there gray area, I think there's a lot of overlap, right? And there are a lot of people like who kind of go back and forth. There are people who are therapists who've decided that, there's this way to do coaching in which you can, you can't provide like therapy, like you said, when things get really serious, but you still have, I think the skill sets are so similar. And, there's this chance to kind of do it differently. What's also interesting to me about the difference between therapy and coaching is I think there are lots of people who might feel more comfortable coming in through the coaching route, right? Like there's something for some people, right, who have a stigma about therapy or think that my problems aren't big enough. But for some of those people, right, like having a coach or someone who's just going to help them clarify what's important to them, work on these goals. I think what's beautiful about it is it feels so accessible. And I think some of the process looks the same a lot of the time, right? Because yes, I think as a therapist, right, we do spend a lot of time looking at the past and how that connects to the future. But a lot of that work with clients too is also working on what's happening right now.
Great point.
And just helping them move through whatever it is that's getting in their way in the moment, whether that be the anxiety or whatever it is. So it's such an interesting question for you to ask, because I think that they're a lot more similar, I think, honestly, than they are different. And I know of a lot of therapists who have chosen to also get coaching certifications. And some people eventually decided that's what they would rather do because it feels like there's more freedom in that and ability to do different things and work different places and stuff like that. So I think the skills that are needed are, so similar. So there's so much overlap there.
I appreciate you naming that. I have a wonderful coach now, and we met recently, and she asked me, I was like working through some stuff, and she was like, "What if this is not about you?" That might have been a question that a therapist years ago would have asked me.
Of course.
And I think your take on this, I appreciate that there is it can be an awful lot of overlap. If people ask me about, because I think sometimes the coaching stuff can get more complicated than it needs to get. I think about it as pretty fundamentally helping the client see something that they're not currently seeing. And with that new awareness, deciding if they want to do something differently, shift their behavior. Pretty simple and straightforward stuff, not easy.
Oh, yeah.
Not easy. The heavy lifting is usually on the other side of the screen. So when and I forgot to mention too, I will ask if a client says to me, maybe they mention anxiety. Let's just go with that as an example. I've been working through that, or they mention they're going to a therapist. I might say, "Hey, tell me, what are you working?" Just top line.
Yep.
If you're up for it, share with me what you're working on with your therapist. I'm one more person in your village. It's helpful for me to know.
100%.
And most of the time when I ask that question, there's relief. Oh, sure. Let me tell you a little bit about what's going on. So I think it can be helpful for folks to know, like, oh, I've got a professional team.
Yes. Yeah. And we can all work together. Yeah. It doesn't have to be like these siloed experiences. And that is going to make it all the richer and the better for the client, right? Like if you are aware of what's happening in the therapy room, that means that that's probably going to guide how you're coaching your client as well, right? Because the things that they're trying to work through. You maybe know where the anxiety is causing some sticky spots, and maybe it'll help you to know that, I can use that lens as we're moving through these things so that we're helping move you forward and not either keeping you where you are or making you feel like this feels totally different than what's happening in the other room and it's confusing, right? So, yeah.
What would you say to somebody who is considering therapy but hasn't connected with a therapist yet?
Awesome. That's a great question. I think what I like people to know is that as you are, and I mean, it's my job, but also I've had a lot of great therapists. So I think that, there's no person that wouldn't benefit from having somebody to talk to, right? And someone to work through whatever it is they feel is important to them, a person who's there literally just to listen to them, who's objective, who doesn't know anything about their life besides like the relationship that you form with them. I think I would also say that there's no reason that's too small to want to talk to somebody. And I also think what's important, I think people sometimes get caught up in that, like, you're not necessarily every therapist. Like I always tell my clients, I am not everyone's therapist, right? So not everybody.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean is like everyone who I work with is not going to, I'm not going to be the best person for them, right? Like we might start I always say the first month or so of our work together, I see as almost like a trial period, right? I'm getting to know you to see if I feel like I can help, I have the skills and the ability to help you, but you're also getting to know me to make sure that I'm the right fit for you. And just because the person you meet off the bat isn't the right fit, that doesn't mean that therapy is not the right thing for you. I think sometimes, you can have a bad experience in something or maybe not feel like someone gets you, but that doesn't mean that that's the end of your journey. It might just be that it was like a bump in the road, and that it means that, that person. And I always tell my clients that, and if that comes up, you let me know, and I'm happy to help you find someone else who can care for you, because it might just not be me, and that's okay.
Yeah. Okay, so this is great. So I love the point that you made that let's assume you're deserving of therapy. Let's just start there. That no issue is too small.
No.
It doesn't have to it doesn't have to be sort of a clear match immediately. It may take a little time. And that therapist that you've linked up with may not be the best one for you.
Yep.
So if somebody's listening to this, Sarah, and saying, okay, like therapy sounds interesting, I like what you've laid out, and they're like going to the internet to try to find a therapist, because again, if there's that stigma, this may be hard for a founder to say to their founder friends, hey, do you have a therapist? Would you recommend a therapist? Where should they begin?
That's a really great question. I would say, I think a lot of people, Psychology Today is just a good place to find like a bunch
Psychology
of
Today.
Yeah, because there's a lot of people that you can look through. I think there's also other websites that are like Mental Health Match. I think, just kind of figuring out for yourself. And it also might be maybe you're going through insurance, right? If that's something that's important to you, and for many people, right? Like it makes it much more affordable, that there are, that's a place to start, right? You can go on your insurance website. Usually there's a place for mental behavioral health, and you can kind of filter by location and what you need. I think, people also thinking about like what is important to you, right? Do you feel like you're someone who at least initially needs to meet in person, or are you someone who's like, telehealth is great. It's like, being able to do everything on a screen has changed my life because it gives me flexibility. So I don't really care whether this person's in person or online. Like I can do either one. And I think that as you start to look, right, and you find people's websites or their profiles on different sites, some of it is really just reading to see if, does this connect with me, right? Just like what they're saying feel like what I need right now. And I think for some people too, it might be that that you're dealing with, you might need a specific kind of therapist, right? Like if you are dealing with some really serious trauma, you're going to want someone who has training in trauma, and perhaps someone who can do like different modalities that are really, helpful and proven to be really good at helping you deal with that. So I think I would hope, like back to where you started with not necessarily feeling comfortable asking your friends, right? That, hopefully there's someone in your life, a trusted person that maybe you could talk to about it. Because I think, or, perhaps there's, the place you work at has like an HR person. Like I think that it's always wonderful when you can tap into a network or someone who can kind of help point you in the direction. Because I think it can be daunting. And I know for me as a therapist, if someone reaches out to me and I know either it's not going to work for us or it's not the right thing, I really try hard to be able to at least point them in the right direction. So hopefully the people you encounter along the way might be able to help you in that way too. But it can be really daunting, and I get that, and especially for someone who's never done it before. So I think it's really thinking about, like, first of all, whether or not you need to go through insurance, or whether that makes no sense to do that. And then if you don't have people you feel like that you can turn to and ask for, do they have something, like figuring out, like, there's a lot of different search engines, I think, that verify therapists that have different, and I think each one might appeal to people differently. I think Psychology Today is just the most known, but there's others, like, let's say, you're part of a certain group, you're looking for a certain kind of therapist, or, you can find all that.
This is an amazing checklist. I want to go back through this again, so folks get it. So you mentioned a couple of resources: Psychology Today and Mental Health Match. Mm-hmm. Think about insurance. Mm-hmm. Think about your needs in terms of, is a two-dimensional space remote a good thing? Mm-hmm. Do I need in person? Is that better? Mm-hmm. And then think about the reason. If there's some significant trauma there, you may want to find somebody that specializes in that, mm-hmm. and that is a practitioner of a specific modality that can be leveraged. Mm-hmm. And then I like your challenge to ask. Like, mm-hmm. It may feel uncomfortable, but stepping into the asking a friend, asking a loved one, mm-hmm. somebody in your village, hey, I'm mm-hmm. thinking about getting a therapist. Do you have any recommendations?
Yes.
That the chances are that person may know a little bit more than.
Yes. And I don't know how many people we would ask wouldn't at least know someone who knows someone, or have heard right. who's seen someone, like the network is smaller than I think we think.
Well, and I'm bringing back around your framework from the jump, like self-kindness. Yeah. If I had a friend in my life that was thinking about this, yes. I would want them to feel like they can ask.
Exactly.
And if they did, I would, maybe not provide the perfect solution for them, but I may have resources that can help make life a little bit easier.
Exactly. Or reach out to someone. And I love so much that you said that, because I also think that idea with self-kindness is something that is also so helpful, right? Like when I think people often feel it's hard to ask for help for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Or reaching out to someone who's having a hard time and not knowing what to say, right? Like someone loses someone in their life and we're thinking, oh, I don't even know what to say. So I just don't even know what to do. I always tell people, well, what would you want someone to do for you? Like, would you want your friend just to reach out and say, hey, I'm thinking about you, or not reach out at all, right? Or like, if I'm so worried, I don't want to ask this person to do this thing. And I say, okay, well, what if they were reaching out to you because they needed that? What would you say? Well, of course I'd want to help them. And I said, and if you didn't want to help them, well, I would just tell them, I'm glad you asked me, but I just can't help. I said, okay. So that's probably what this person in your life is thinking too. So I'm so glad you said that, because I think that's another place where that question, that treating yourself like you treat a friend, is just kind of reminding yourself that, like, we're all humans, and we're all like, for the most part, if there are people in our life, are probably here to help each other. So, reminding ourselves of that. Like, how would I respond to that person? That's probably how they're going to respond to you. And that's probably what they're going to want from you.
That's a great example of assuming positive intent.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
What have we not hit so far? What's on your list that we haven't had a chance to talk about?
We've covered a lot of ground, Kevin.
We have.
I know.
I have another question, but I don't want to
ask me, because every time you say something, I'm like, oh yeah, that too. Okay. So you're doing great.
I want to make sure you said at the beginning, like, what does this look like? How do we access it? I want to hit that second question, because I think that is, let's imagine somebody's thinking about a therapist, or maybe just in the meantime, looking for a therapeutic way, something therapeutic to access this self-kindness. How could they do that right now?
I love it.
What are things they could employ right away?
This is great. Okay. Well, first of all, I think just being able to stop yourself in the moment and say, like, what would I say to my best friend? Or would I say this to my best friend, right? When we find ourselves struggling in a moment, feeling overwhelmed by something, feeling like that self-critic gets real loud, right? When that comes up, that like negative voice, and when we start saying these unkind things to ourselves, just pausing and saying, like, would I say that to my friend? And if the answer is no, okay, well, what would I say to my friend? And trying to just kind of conjure up this voice. And sometimes for people, that's too hard. Yeah. And even being able to think of their friend, like, okay, so pretend your friend is there. And now tell your friend, like think about that friend and tell that friend that thing, right? Just so that you can separate yourself a little bit and then kind of turn it back to yourself. So that's one thing that I think you could just have. You can keep that with you all the time, right?
Yes.
Like just in your head. Another thing I really love as a way to an exercise to do is to write a compassionate letter to yourself.
Okay. Tell me more about this.
So you literally would just pretend, like similar to how you would talk to your friend, you would write a letter as if you were a person that you were writing a letter to, and just, giving them compassionate kindness. And whether it be about the situation that you're going through, whether it just be in general, just telling yourself, giving yourself grace and kindness and love, and in that space, like having a chance to do that can be really helpful. That's another really great exercise. And then I also love, you can find them on if you look up mindful self-compassion, Kristen Neff, she's kind of the founder of it. There's lots of wonderful meditations to do that are based in mindful self-compassion that are really beautiful. And it's a really lovely way to tap into that compassionate, like self-kindness.
Yeah.
And in that, one thing in that too, for some people having like a gesture that they can do, like that feels self-kind, like whether it's like, for me, it's always like putting my hand on my heart, like that feels like really nice. Some people, it's like maybe you give yourself like a little hug, or like maybe like you squeeze your hand, just something that you can do just to like kind of be like, okay, like you're okay. Give yourself just some of that compassion and that kindness. So I think those are really simple things that you can do. And what's so beautiful about self-compassion and self-kindness is that it really has, there's studies been done about how much it can really help your mental health and help improve how you feel, how you function. It's really helpful, because I think we all have, or I won't say all, but many of us, right, have a pretty loud self-critic, and learning ways to help tame that, turn the volume down, and treat ourselves in ways that are kind. It just helps reduce anxiety, make us feel better. Like it's just a much gentler, kinder way, I think, to live our lives. And we are, we're with ourselves all the time. So we should be really nice to ourselves.
Yeah. This is so great. This is such a good practical list. The mindful self-compassion, the meditations, asking yourself the question, would I say this to my best friend? That would, I think, stop me in my tracks a good amount of the time, because I don't have a good answer for that. What is on my mind is write a compassionate letter to yourself. I mean, we live in a time where we're writing thousands of messages, via social media and DMs, through text messaging, emails. I mean, we are producing mass quantities of messages all the time. And yet, how many people have written a compassionate letter to themselves?
Yeah.
I would imagine far fewer.
Very fewer. Yeah. And again,
the list that you're offering is not an expensive one.
No.
It's not a like climb to the top of this mountain and then, bring this thing back. It's pretty straightforward, but it requires, I can imagine, doing in that example I gave earlier, like fear and anger. If I'm in a moment where a self-compassionate letter would go a long way, I'm probably thinking that's the last thing on the planet that would help.
100%.
So how do I take one step closer to that?
Well, I imagine you might have to take a couple steps to get there, right? Like, maybe get yourself grounded in a place where you can do that. Ask yourself some of the questions. Maybe it's also, that might be the best thing to do when it's the last thing you want to do, right?
Interesting.
Like that might be the thing that is going to give you something to focus on, like something positive, and maybe see what happens, right? Like, let's see what happens. Maybe I'm going to prove that anger and that fear wrong. And this is actually going to totally disarm it and make me feel like a whole lot better. And if I don't feel ready to do that right now, totally understandable. So what else can you do in that moment to kind of regulate yourself, take care of yourself, get yourself back to a place where that feels doable.
Amazing. Amazing. I like that. The feelings that may come up for me might be a signal that this is exactly the thing worth moving towards. Sarah, my friend, it's been so great to reconnect in this way, and it's been so wonderful to hear your wisdom. I like to wrap by, as we close, just asking for takeaways.
Yeah.
And,
well, go ahead.
Well, no, I have one, but I want to hear what if anything came up or moved for you over the course of the conversation.
Yeah. Well, I thank you for giving me this space and letting me talk about this, because I feel like it sounds easier now that I've sat here and talked to, like, having those takeaways. Like it feels really doable for me.
Yeah.
And I think that it just, for me, has reinforced this idea of how important this is and how it makes it feel like it makes sense, I guess, for me right now. Like, this makes sense. Like, of course, these are the things that we should be doing for ourselves right now. Like, of course, we should be giving ourselves this compassion and this kindness and taking care of ourselves in this way, whatever that means.
I'm so glad that you brought this in, and that you wanted to talk about self-kindness today. I think this has been a great lesson for me. A wonderful reminder. I mean, I now have a new question. Would I say this to my best friend? That's a takeaway for me.
See? Yeah.
Added to the list of will this matter in 20 years?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think what's so brilliant about your way of being in the world and your version of therapy and support is you're not fixing things for people. You're not providing all the answers. You're just sitting with them and asking really thoughtful questions based on how these people are showing up. And I think if we can do more of that for one another and for ourselves,
how wonderful.
the world, I think, would be a little better.
Right? I agree. And, that might change the way we are with ourselves, and eventually maybe change the way we treat each other too,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
How can folks get in touch with you if they're curious and want to learn more about your work?
Amazing. Thank you. So I think the easiest thing to do is go to my website, which is Sarah Musich, Sarah with an H, lcsw.com.
Okay.
All my contact information is on there. And I guess I would say that while I'm only licensed in California, that even if someone's not in California and they're just having questions about therapy or needing help getting started, that you can always shoot me an email or send me a message. And I'm happy to help, happy to try and help point in the right direction or give information. So it's part of what I like to do.
Yes. Well, thank you, Sarah. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. And folks listening, thank you for listening.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Thanks for tuning into the Delta Podcast. If you're ready to lead through change, stay with us. Until next time, remember, it's always a great day to be coachable.